everybody. How are y'all doing today? Doing all right? It's a little mixed result, I got to be honest. You may be having the same thing I'm having. I want to warn you ahead of time. A nasty stomach bug virus has gone through my house, and I'm on the end of that recipient, and I'm not feeling great today. So it's like my Michael Jordan flu game, and so I'm here. I'm excited about it, and if I run off backstage, just don't ask any detailed questions. You need to know what that? Keith's right here. He'll step up, and at the end of service, I'm not going to come talk to you because the only reason you want to come talk to me is if you want a day off work tomorrow, and I'm not getting involved in that. So if afterwards you'd like to talk to a pastor, Keith will be right over here in this corner. Would love to talk to you about that. All right, so in Matthew chapter 12, Jesus is walking along on the Sabbath day, and his disciples are there with him, and they cut through a wheat field, and on the way, the disciples are kind of doing like you do, just kind of running your hand along, and they're grabbing some grain and eating it, which technically is they're harvesting grain. I mean, not really, but that's technically what they're doing. And so the Pharisees, religious leaders, the lawyers of the day are saying, oh, you're breaking the Sabbath. You're working on the Sabbath because you're harvesting grain. So Jesus deals with that, shuts them down. He knows the law better than they do. And then he goes into the synagogue, as he often did on the Sabbath day, and there was a man inside the room who had a disability. He had a shriveled hand. And I don't know if it was an injury or if it was born that way, but he had a shriveled hand. And so the religious leaders like, oh, this is a way to get him caught. The disciples ate grain, he didn't, but now we're going to get him. And they kind of parade this guy in front of the room, no care about his feelings or his struggle. They just want to get to Jesus, and they parade this guy in front of the room, and they say, hey, Jesus, is it okay to heal on the Sabbath day? And Jesus deals with them on that, shuts them down. He knows the law better than they do. And then verse 13 says, then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And the man stretched it out, and it was completely restored, just as sound as the other. And the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus, because he showed them up. Aware of this, Jesus withdrew from that place, and a large crowd followed him, and he healed all who were ill. If Jesus was here today, he could help me. It'd be great. He'd say, healed all who were ill, and he warned them not to tell others about him. Now, this is just like a normal Saturday. So Matthew records this account for us, but he doesn't intend for us necessarily to think this is like some wild day unlike any other. This is just kind of the way Jesus lived his life. Confrontations with religious leaders, healing people who had need, giving comfort and teaching to those who were eager for it. This is just the way he did it. And he warned them not to tell other people, not because he was embarrassed or afraid of conflict. He dealt with conflict all the time. He said not to tell others because he didn't want to escalate their violence. It wasn't time yet. It wasn't time for his ministry to conclude. Verse 17 says, this was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. Here's my servant whom I've chosen, the one I love and whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will proclaim justice to the nations. He will not quarrel or cry out. No one will hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break. A smoldering wick he will not snuff out until he has brought justice through to victory. In his name, the nations put their hope. Jesus didn't draw all the attention to himself. I think that's interesting. This verse says you won't hear him in the streets. He's not calling attention to himself. If you notice that, it's not that he doesn't deserve it. He's God after all. I think he's being a model to us, a model of humility, a model of deference to God. And then I love verse 20. It says, a bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. Jesus was a powerful leader. Jesus would have confrontations and debates and showdowns in front of people. He was very strong and confident, but he was also very gentle. He was the holiest man who ever lived, but prostitutes and thieves flocked to Jesus, and they felt loved by him. Jesus was the greatest leader ever to live, literally changed the face of history, and yet widows and little children and hurting people found a safe place in his presence. It says in his name, the nations will put their hope. And all of that context gets us to where we want to be for today. I want you to notice the pattern of what Jesus is dealing with his life. He's healing hundreds of hurting people. The crowds are growing larger and larger, and the jealous religious leaders are becoming more and more aggressive, more and more violent. All that leads us to the verse we want to get to for this morning, verse 22. It says, then they brought him a demon-possessed man who was blind and mute, and Jesus healed him so that he could both talk and see. And all the people were astonished and said, could this man be the son of David? Now, I don't really know why this grabbed their attention so. Just in these verses, he'd already healed a lot of people. He'd healed demon-possessed people. He'd healed blind people and mute people. He dealt with all of that. But for some reason, the combination of this guy's tough life caught their attention. It says they were astonished. And they said, is this the Messiah? Is this the Son of David? Is this the one we've been waiting for? And the religious leaders, jealous, off to the side because of all the attention Jesus is getting, can't let them be the hero. And so it says when the Pharisees heard them saying this, they said, it's only by Beelzebub, the prince of demons, that this fellow drives out demons. He can't be the good guy. He can't be the Messiah. He's not the hero in this story. And then Jesus said words that we still quote today. Jesus knew their thoughts and said to them, every kingdom divided against itself will be ruined, and every city or household divided against itself will not stand. If somebody, one of you, could email this to every political leader today, that'd be great. Every news station, all the social media outlets. If you could just blast that around to all of them, I think we could learn a lot from this verse. We've lost sight of it. But I think it's also interesting that it says he knows their thoughts. So Jesus is at a distance from them. There's a large crowd, and they're in the back of the crowd. And people are saying, he may be the one, he may be the one. And they mutter to themselves, he's not the one. And Jesus knows what they're thinking. And then speaks to it in front of the crowd. He says, fellas, aren't we supposed to be on the same team here? You and I are supposed to be on the same team. I mean, even today you see churches not acting like they're on the same team. Followers of Jesus should always strive to be on the same team. You see it messed up all the time. And then Jesus, the smartest man in all of history, completely outwits them all. It says if Satan drives out Satan, he's divided against himself. How then can his kingdom stand? And if I drive out demons by Beelzebul, by whom do your people drive them out? So then they will be your judges. But if it's by the Spirit of God that I drive out demons, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. Jesus, checkmate here. They can't get around that. He's smarter than they are. He knows the law better than they do. He's more holy than they are. And then verse 29 is where I wanted us to get. All of that was getting us ready for verse 29. Verse 29 says, or again, how can anyone enter a strong man's house and carry off his possessions unless he first ties up the strong man? Then he can plunder his house. Now Jesus is using poetic language here, certainly. And he's also speaking into the context of all the events that we just read about. That's why we took time to go through all of those. But this verse, I believe, is not famous enough. This verse is not as famous as a house divided against itself cannot stand. This verse is not as famous as the Great Commission or some other Jesus statements, and I think it should be. This verse is transformative. This verse is a mandate for every Christian. If you're a follower of Jesus, this is a mandate for you. It's a mandate for every church, especially when you add verse 30 in, as we will in just a minute. But let me break it down for us, make sure we're clear on it, because no one very rarely teaches on this verse. So you have a strong man, you have possessions in the strong man's house, and you have someone seeking to plunder that house, right? So based on that context, who's the strong man in Jesus' analogy? It's Satan, right? He heals the man who is possessed by a demon and heals him. This poor man couldn't see. This poor man couldn't talk. This man was a shell of what God had designed him to be, and Jesus, with the word, sets him free. Jesus plundered the man from Satan's house, to use the analogy. You know, in our life right now, if we were to think about each of us and the connections we have, in our life right now, there are people who don't know the Lord. There are people who are hurting. There are people who are alone. There are people whose life is a shell of what it was designed to be, and Jesus wants to set them free. Jesus wants to plunder them from his house. I mean, honestly, right in this room, some of you are very alone and you're very afraid and you have a lot of anxiety and you're not sure what you believe about the Lord, and you have a lot of things coming against you. You're not what God designed you to be, and he wants to set you free. That's what Jesus is all about. In fact, if we'd gone back just a little bit earlier in the passage, back in Matthew 9, sets the whole thing up. Matthew 9, Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. So ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. And for the next 3 chapters, leading up to where we just read, Jesus and his disciples were modeling that. They were going out into the harvest field. They were helping those who were harassed, helping those who were helpless. Jesus and his disciples were plundering Satan's house. Now, they're not breaking any bruised reeds. They're not snuffing out any smoldering wicks. They're gentle, but they're plundering the house. So we have the strong man, Satan, and we have possessions in his house. That's people, hurting people. And we have someone seeking to plunder that house. Who in Jesus' analogy is seeking to plunder the house? It's a little bit of a trick question. I mean, Jesus is certainly seeking to do that. He's demonstrating that in the story. But not just Jesus, especially when you consider the next verse. Verse 29 says, or again, how can anyone enter a strong man's house and carry off his possessions unless he first ties up the strong man, and then he can plunder the house? For whoever is not with me is against me. Jesus set out to plunder the house, and then he said to all of us, follow me. Jesus set out to plunder the house, and then he said to all of us, if you're not with me, you're against me. And that means that my job and your job, whether you're a pastor at a church like me, or whether you're an accountant or teacher or welder or farmer or nurse, if you're a follower of Jesus, your job is to help plunder the house. We have a world full of hurting people, harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And if we don't have compassion on them, if we don't pray for more workers, we've misunderstood Jesus' message. I mean, just this week, did you watch this week at all? I just saw just a snippet of the coverage of the young man in Antioch who felt like his best option was to be full of hate and full of anger. He wrote all this vile stuff online, and then he took a gun into the school and began to shoot people very quickly before he took his own life. I mean, there's something wrong in our world. And we look for different solutions, but ultimately it's a spiritual problem. There's something wrong. And Jesus has compassion, and he's calling us to plunder the house. And Jesus made it clear that if we don't join him in plundering the house, then we're against him. You can be with him plundering the house. You can be against him, opposed to him plundering the house. But you can't be passively in favor of him plundering the house while you stand idly by safely from a distance. That's not an option. If you and I are passively in favor of the house getting plundered, but we're doing nothing about it, we would say it's a big distinction from being opposed to Jesus. He doesn't give us that option. He says, whoever is not with me is actually against me. And that means that my job and your job is to work together to plunder the house, to help people who are currently under the influence of Satan, to use the metaphor, and to release them by Jesus' power to a life of freedom and forgiveness, to release them to an eternity with the Lord. That's why we're here. That's why WellSpring does everything that WellSpring does. Now, just so no one misunderstands, I believe that a big percentage of the work I'm describing in plundering the house happens outside of this building. This is not a plea to get you in the building all the time. Much of the work happens outside of the church building. Much of the work happens when we get friends with people in our office, or neighbors down the street, or kids who play with our kids in ball teams, and we get to know their parents. When we meet those people and begin to connect with them and reach out to them in the name of Jesus, they may have physical needs and struggles that make their plight easy to see, like this man, or they may be gaining the whole world and forfeiting their soul. But something's not right in our world. Something's not right in them. Something's not right sometimes in me. And if they don't have an active relationship with Jesus, then Jesus describes them as being in the house, and it's our job to set them free because Jesus wants them out. Plundering the house will likely involve us building relationships on purpose with people who don't know the Lord. Plundering the house will likely involve us getting in a group so we can be supported as we try to do this and support others. Plundering the house will likely involve us writing a check or giving of our time, or both. Because everything we do as a church is about plundering the house. It's all about helping people follow Jesus. It's what we do. If you're new with us today, you came on a great Sunday, because I want to give you a sense of what it is that we do. I mean, think about it. Why is it that we tell people we want them to find a family? It's so they can find spiritual support and encouragement, because following Jesus can be tough sometimes. Why do we want people to know God? Because that's the bottom line of plundering the house. Why do we want them to make an impact? Because the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are still few, and the house is still pretty full. And we don't want you to come and receive, as great as that is. We want you to come and make an impact, to give of yourself, for all of us to lock arms together and throw our shoulder into the work, because the house, obviously from the news, is still pretty full. And embracing discipleship is a lifetime commitment of following God personally, but also in joining a group of other Christians and collectively plundering the house. That's what we do. So let me take a moment to show you how this could work in your life, no matter where you are this morning, you and your family. First of all, let me speak to our guests. So over the last few months, we've had a lot of people come check WellSpring out for the first time. Lots of people. Many people have done that. If that's you this morning, if you've survived all the sickness going around and you're here, welcome. We're glad that you're here. You've actually come on a great Sunday because you're going to get a sense of what it is that we're trying to do as a church, which is helpful for you if you're trying to figure out what that looks like for you. So let me speak directly to you, our guests, for just a moment. I want to encourage you to find a place here. And the way to do that, I want to give you two encouragements to do that. First of all, I want to challenge you to be authentic. Don't put on airs. Just come as you are. Be yourself. You don't need to put on a mask. You don't need to assume that everybody out here has got everything all figured out. They don't. You don't need to assume that everybody up here has everything all figured out. We don't. We would love to know you, the real you, not the fake pretentious you that you're trying to convince us of, just you. So be authentic, be yourself. And second, I want to challenge you to reward authenticity. You may not be someone who's used to people being honest and real about their situation and their struggles. So as you meet people here, you're going to find some who are. We try to do that. We try to be honest and vulnerable about things going on in our life. And so when you sense that, when you sense somebody's being real with you, reward that. Don't push them away. Don't run and hide in a corner. Don't call them a freak. Reward them for taking a chance on you to receive that which they shared with you. Ultimately, we want you to help us build the culture that we're looking for. And ultimately, we want you to become part of our family, not just a guest on the outside, but part of us. And so I think you being real is a great way to start. Let me talk secondly to those who are part of the WellSpring family for just a minute. First of all, let me give you a couple of family updates. So if you're a guest and you want to check out, I guess you can. But let me give you a couple of family updates. This would be a good time for us to do that. First of all, our church is led by a group of elders. That's been true from early on in our church. And I work closely with them. I think it's how the Bible lays out for the church to be led. And so we've been working over the last couple of years to get that group up. We had 4, and then we moved to 5. We want to get to 6 members, not counting me. And we've been working to get it on a rotation so it's a 3-year term. And after 3 years, they rotate off, and there's not a lifetime commitment or any of those kind of things. So every year, we want to have 2 brand new elders, 2 1-year elders, 2 2-year elders, and then it rotates through. So it just keeps a fresh perspective on that. And we're almost there. We're getting closer. We've been working on it for a couple of years. So today I want to present to you a new potential member for your consideration. We've been meeting a lot with Ryan Stout. He and Julie and their boys have been a part of WellSpring for many years. You saw him on the drums today. Does a great job with that. He also leads a men's group. It's appropriately titled A Bible and a Biscuit, which I think is a creative title. He's done that for a long time. And I would say to you, leading any group is worthy of your, respect. Leading a group spiritually, it's admirable. If you knew the rascals in that group specifically, you'd give him more respect. That's a wild group. And so he's been doing that for a long time, and we believe that God wants him to join our elder team. And so the way we do that here, we don't vote on things. The way we do that here is we're presenting that to you, and we'd like you to take the next 30 days and pray for the Stouts. Seriously, pray for them. This is a big spiritual target they're putting on their back. They're taking on a big responsibility. And then review the biblical requirements in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1. And if you see any way that you think he doesn't fit that vision, we think he does. But if you know things that doesn't fit that vision, then we'd like to know about it. And if at the end of 30 days, if there's not any disqualifying reason revealed, then he'll join our eldership formally in 30 days. And again, be praying for the Stouts. Second family announcement. If you've been with WellSpring for a long time, you know how stable our leadership has been. If you've only been with WellSpring a couple of years, you may not be sure you agree with that statement. So Amy and I moved here to help start WellSpring 22 years ago this week. That hit me just this week. 22 years ago this week, we moved here to help start WellSpring. And in the first 19 years of our history, we had 4 full-time staff members step off our staff for one reason or the other. 4 in 19 years. That's pretty stable. In the 20th year, we had 4 full-time staff members step off our staff for one reason or another. 4 in 1 year, not so stable, right? And that's not for any particular reason. It's all for different reasons. There's not some grand theme or scandal. And then in our 21st year, we had another one step off, called to move out of state, all for unrelated reasons. And so it's led to a lot of instability at our staff level. Now, we've rehired 2 full-time pastors to cover that, but 5 minus 2 is still a big number, and we're still significantly understaffed. Now, part of that was to let the dust settle. We weren't used to having that much turnover. Part of that was to allow the elders and I to kind of prayerfully formulate, what do we want our staff to look like? We're having a chance to kind of reshape some things. And part of that, honestly, was economics. With COVID, we didn't talk about money much, and I think that probably impacted things. With inflation, our offerings didn't keep up with inflation because everything got so much more expensive. And with interest rates, this building got a lot more expensive because it resets every 5 years like commercial loans do. So our elders and financial team have wrestled with that because we see the need, but we're trying to wrestle with how to do it. And so recently, they've approved hiring 2 full-time positions, a full-time discipleship minister to help people who are part of our church grow in their faith and embrace discipleship, and a full-time connections minister to help people who are new to our church get plugged in and become a part of things connected to God and each other. And then with the unprecedented, and we've already started that, by the way. We've started interviewing for people for that. Hopefully we'll have some announcements for that soon. But as we're doing all of that, we've had all this unprecedented growth in our younger people and a renewed responsibility, we believe, to deal with that. So this recently, they've approved us pausing our residency program, which we love, for 1 year, and that 1 year pause will pay for us to hire a full-time adult associate or a student associate minister to work under with Gabe, and a full-time associate kids minister to work with Emily to address all of the numbers of kids and students coming into our ministry. And our hope financially, as things grow, we will prayerfully relaunch that residency program next summer after a 1 year hiatus. But we're going to have to see how the finances trend. Just being candid with you. We'll have to see how that goes. It might require a longer pause than that. We don't want it to, but it might require a longer pause than that. These are exciting days for our family, and we don't get the time to talk about these things much, so I wanted to take some time to talk to you about it today. So if you're in the family, I have a couple of things I'd like to ask you to do, just like I did our guest. First of all, I want to challenge you to connect relationally. Don't allow yourself just to stay in a crowd. Don't allow yourself just to be part of a big group. Can I get just a little bit blunt with you? I think a lot of Christians today, this is not a WellSpring thing. This is just I think a post-COVID Christian thing, honestly. A lot of Christians today come to church once a month, once every other month, and then they wonder why they don't feel more connected relationally. And I'm just going to say to you, you're going to have a hard time feeling relationally connected to a group that you only see once a month or once every other month, especially if you're seeing them in a large crowd like this. You're just going to have a hard time feeling that way. I was talking to a pastor friend of mine recently. He doesn't go to our church, but he was talking about the weather. And it's something I've been noticing lately too. Like, I think it's, again, this post-COVID, but like the weather, it's hard to be a pastor with the weather. Like, you don't want the weather to be bad. I'm not talking about ice and danger. So I'm talking about like it's raining or it's a little chilly or it's really hot. You don't want the weather to be bad. People won't show if it's hot. A lot of people just won't come. It's hot today. You also don't want the weather to be very good. Like, you don't want it 75 and sunny, or people going to play golf, they're going to the mountains, or doing, like, what you want as a pastor to look out the window on Sunday morning and think it's mildly unfortunate. Like, you just want it sort of in the middle, not great, not bad. And I think the early church is going to roll their eyes at us when we get to heaven, when we tell them how we chose to go to church, when it was like overcast. Like, I think it's sad. And if I'm honest, it's leading to lots of people feeling disconnected, not just from WellSpring, but from church and from God, and it's not going to lead to good places. We push you a lot to get into a ministry, and it's not really because we have all these holes. We have some holes, is a growing ministry. But the dirty little secret I'm going to let you in on is I want you to get into ministry as much for you as I do for us. I want you to get to know people. And it's hard to get to know 250 people sitting across the room in rows. It's much easier if it's two or three of you working in the kids' classroom, or two or three of you working to set that room up or this space up, and you're doing it together. You're making coffee together. You're around a couple of people. You'll get to know them. You won't get to know 250 people sitting in rows. So I would love for you to help out more for you than for us. And can I just say, don't allow your kids to stay in a crowd. And the downs, I'm talking about, like, if you come once a month or once every other month, you're not going to get connected. Your kids aren't either. And you may have a solid relationship with the Lord. They're still figuring all that out. And if you bring them here, there are kind, loving adults who are going to connect with them every week. They're sacrificing their time to minister to your kids, to your grandkids. And they want to get to know your kids. They want to impact your kids with the gospel. They're going to teach your kids to be kind to their siblings. You want that. They're going to teach your kids to be responsible. You want that. They're going to teach your kids to love the Lord. You want that, because they're going to agree with you on so many things. But you've got to get them here to get them connected to that, and that'll help you connect as well. By the way, if you have middle school students, now's a great time to get your kids connected. We're launching today a second middle school class. We've had a middle school class during this service often, so your kids are in there right now. We're beginning a second class during the second service, so whichever service you come to, your kids can come to that, or they could attend a service with you and then go to class. They could do that, or they could serve and go to a class. They could do different options that way. So that'll be at 9 and 10:45, and that starts today. But you may not realize your middle school student can't drive. So if they're going to get here, I need you to do that. Okay, all right. High schoolers, by the way, are also helping people connect. High schoolers are launching new groups in the next couple of weeks, home groups. So in addition to Wednesday night, they can be in a smaller setting and really get to know a handful of adults and other students, and encourage them to do that. Don't allow your family to not connect relationally. You all need that, every one of you, and we want to help. So connect relationally. Second, contribute responsibly. If you're going to be part of the family, I want you to contribute. Dozens and dozens and dozens of men, women, and students every week are giving of their time to make all of this work. They're setting things up. They're making coffee. They're having you park cars. They're leading classes back there. They're making things work in here. There's people up in that room making the tech work. They're doing all these things. And if you're our guest, I love that you're here. I don't want you to have any obligation. Kick back, enjoy your time together. Let us care for you and teach you about the Lord. No sense of obligation. But if you're family, it gets weird if you don't start helping. And that's not about us. That's about you. Like if you go to somebody's house for dinner that you don't really know very well, you sit there formally, and at the end of the night, they pick up the dishes and put them in the dishwasher, and you say, hey, can I help you with that? No. You sit there, and you're like, okay. And you sit there while they clean up the kitchen, and then you go home. They load the dishwasher. But if it's your friends, at some point you stop doing that. At some point when it's time to clean up, if it's your friends, you all get up because you're not a guest anymore. You're family with them, and you load the dishwasher and you put stuff away. So if you're our guest, sit here very formally, and I hope you enjoy the experience. I hope you connect with God. I hope you connect with some of us and feel welcome and all of that. I mean, seriously, I hope that's true for you. But if you're family, or if you want to be family, part of what will help that is if you would be a part. Again, more for you than for us, if I'm honest. That's the dirty little secret. Let's talk about money for a second. While I'm annoying everybody, let's talk about money for just a second. I would guess that most of you, if I had you write on a piece of paper, I would guess that most of you have no idea how big our electric bill is here. You know, you pay your electric bill, when it gets cold, it goes up. We're conditioning over 40,000 square foot of space. Our electric bill here is bigger than my mortgage at home by a long shot. Like it's a lot bigger. It's cold out, right? You know, so if you meet somebody new and they ask you out to lunch and you go out to lunch with them and they buy your lunch, that's kind of cool. I mean, they asked you they met you at work or something. That's cool. They bought your lunch. And if you go out a second time or a third time for lunch, just a coworker, not like a dating, but like a coworker thing, and they keep buying you lunch, that's kind of cool. But at some point it gets weird. Like at some point it's like, hey, I can buy my own lunch, or maybe I should buy you lunch this time since you bought for me the last 18 times in a row. Like at some point, you need to do that. Or I mean, it's kind of cool. Let you buy your lunch every time. That's great. I'll just let you buy my lunch every day. But at some point, it's kind of weird. So if you're our guest, I don't want any of your money. I don't want you to feel any obligation. I want you to authentically enjoy your time here. Come as you are, all your fears and doubts and skepticism, all of it. We'll take all of it. But at some point, if you're family, and that's up to you, if you consider yourself family, it gets weird if you're not contributing. And I don't know what anybody gives, by the way. So I don't know if you're the biggest giver in the history of our church or if you've never given a dime. I don't know. I don't want to know. But for you, at some point, you know, and it's weird because there's a lot of money getting spent to provide this opportunity for you and your kids. It's just weird not to share the responsibility at some point if you're connected. You know, the biblical standard for giving is 10% of income. And I know that sounds extreme to a lot of you. That's what Amy and I do, just honestly. We've done that for a long time, a lot of years. But I know that sounds extreme for some of you, and that seems way out of reach from where you are right now. So if you're not giving anything, start giving something. If you're giving sporadically, start giving regularly. Budget it. Maybe you can put it on a auto draft thing so you're committed, you know? If you're giving regularly a certain amount, maybe switch to a percentage so it's proportional to who you are, because that is kind of the biblical model. Maybe you're not close to 10%. That's okay, start where you are. Maybe give 1% or 2% or 5%, but start with where you are. I think the reason that God told us to give in terms of percentage is because it's not about the amount of money. Someone just starting out in their career is not going to make as much, and so they shouldn't give as much as someone all the way up in their career. And as we rise in our career, it should cause us to rise in our generosity. It's a percentage issue. So if you're family, connect relationally, contribute responsibly as part of that family. A few months ago, we launched a third category. We called it the WellSpring Collective. It's designed for family members who want to grow more spiritually. They want to share more of the collective burden of our church. They want to know more of what's going on, get some inside information of what's coming up and things that are happening. A lot of what I'm telling you today, they've known for quite a while. And I don't have time to give you all the information this morning about how that's going to work or what it means. We did an information meeting for those who were interested. A lot of you came to that. We're going to hold a duplicate version of that. So if you already came to it last fall, don't worry about it. But in a few weeks, we're going to do another kind of information meeting to see if you want to be part of that. If you're not currently part of this team and you'd like to find out more about that, just write collective on the card or tell them at the desk that you want to be included, and we'll make sure that you hear about it before the meeting happens, and we'll announce it in here, but we'll make sure you hear about it as well. You'll get like a special invite from us, okay? Because the WellSpring Collective is going to be a really important thing for us going forward, and I would love for a lot of you consider joining with us in that, if that's what you choose to. Let me bottom line this for you just a second. I remember years ago, by the way, thank you for being patient. I threw a lot of stuff at you. I remember a number of years ago, it clicking in my head that pronouns are a great way to see where somebody's at with the church. So you'll hear sometimes people will talk and they'll say something like, I like your church. Or I like that your church does jetpacks for the kids. And you know right where they're at when they say that. That means they're a guest. This is not their church. They're talking about your church. They're separate from it. So you got your church that I'm a part of, but they're separate. And they like it. They like what our church is doing. But then at some point, they switch and they start talking about my church. And I've even had people say, is it okay for me to call it my church? I'm like, yes, I would love for you to call it my church. Because that means you got some ownership there. It's like you're part of the family now. And they'll maybe say the same things, but it comes from a different place. So instead of saying, I like that your church gives out jetpacks, I like that my church is feeding hungry kids. Like, my church is doing that. Or I like that my church is so engaged with the students and the kids, teaching about the Lord and really training them up and connecting with them. I love that my church does that. It's like a part of the family. And even though collective has been a new label for us, I've noticed that pronoun for a long time. And the pronoun, it goes from your church to my church, becomes our church. And where it switches, it becomes a shared responsibility. So like I might say, hey, my church needs some volunteers in the nursery if I'm a family member. But if I'm in that collective level, I say, we've got a nursery problem, something we've got to deal with. Or I might say, I hear my church is, with inflation, my church is paying attention to the numbers a little bit, or we're hiring some new people. It's kind of exciting. But if it's our church, it's like, hey, we've got to pull it together and make this happen. It's just a little different level of ownership. And what I believe to be true, and the news every day makes me more convinced it's true. Reading about that poor man, honestly, troubled man in Antioch, and how that's not an unusual story these days, makes it more true for me. Our world, there's something wrong in our world. Something's not right. I don't care what your perspective is. I don't care how in tune you are to the news or how politically oriented you are or any of those things. Just a simple gaze at life today says something's off. And I guarantee you, I know what it is. It's spiritual. Many people in America are privately turning away from God. And as they do, intentionally or subtly, with distraction, our life is beginning to unravel. Our culture's beginning to unravel. Our world's beginning to unravel. And we need the church on point today more than maybe we've needed it in my entire lifetime. We need the church on point to say we're pulling together. We're going to love each other through these times. We're going to band together and make an impact in the world. And we're going to plunder the house because the house has a lot of bodies in it. And the Lord is looking to us to fulfill the ministry that started with Jesus. And I need all of us on board for that. So if you're not a Christian yet, I'm so glad you're here. I'd love to impact you and let you know about the Lord and meet with you for coffee and all of that. If you're a follower of Jesus, I want to challenge you to use the rest of your life, however long God gives you, however long God gives me. Use the time you have to make the greatest impact for his kingdom that you can, and we will all celebrate in heaven what God has done through us in his name and for his glory. And I want to challenge you to join me for that ride. Why don't you bow your head and let me pray. Dear God, I thank you. Thank you so much, Lord, for your vision for the church. This wasn't my idea. It wasn't any of our ideas. This was your idea to pull a group of people together, to honor you, to pursue you, and in the midst to reach out and help those around them, to plunder the house, to be with you as you plunder the house. And God, our world is in need of that ministry. This room is in need of that ministry. So many lonely, anxious, hurting people with relationship problems and kids' struggles and financial issues and work drama. And so many of us need to put you right in the middle of our life and get some people around us to go through life with and find a purpose to pursue. And your church answers all of that. You answer all of that. You are the hope for our world. And so, God, I just want to commit the life that you've given me to you. I want to commit the time that I have to you. I want to commit the remainder of my days to you. And I want to ask my friends here to join me for your glory and your honor to see many lives touched in your name. We pray in Jesus' name.